This happened to me over 10 years ago, when I was younger and dumber. I made a bad decision that night, which could have ended very badly. For a long time I tried to just block it out my mind and pretended like it never happened. Mostly because I felt stupid for having put myself in that situation. But lately, I've thought about it more often. I guess because now I would have handled it differently. I met Jay online. At the time I was feeling a bit sad because things hadn't worked out between me and someone else that I had been seeing and developed some feelings for. So I was feeling vulnerable. We lived in different countries, but my parents were from his country, and we would travel there every year. I told him this when we first started talking, and he seemed interested in continuing to chat with me, even though we lived far away. It seemed alright at first. I even told him we were traveling there in just a few months, and he said he would like to go for coffee with me when I was in his city, as I would typically go there and spend a few days since I have family. I was okay with that, because he seemed like a normal guy. That is, of course, until things started to change. Not 1 week into talking, his conversations became more aggressive and sexual. Where we were on Skype one day, he asked to see my jugs. Obviously now, I would block him straight away, but back then I didn't. I declined. And he got mad, manipulating me, telling me I didn't trust him and the like. I knew he was being obscene, but I was starved for attention, even if it was in that form. I rationalized his behavior to myself that maybe he was just teasing me, or he had a bad day. Obviously, deep down, I knew I was just making excuses for him. I acted dumb, but I wasn't stupid, even though I did make stupid decisions during this entire situation. For a while, he didn't talk to me. I figured he just wasn't interested, and that was that. And, to be honest, I didn't really care. Maybe a month or so later, I get a friend request from him on Facebook. I was surprised, also curious as to why he was sending me a friend request. I accepted, and a little while later he messaged me. He asked for my phone number so he could hear my voice. Weird. He had already spoken to me several times, ignored me for weeks, then suddenly friends me and wants to hear my voice. I agreed, and we spoke a bit over the phone. He just asked random questions, nothing out of the ordinary, but I could detect a coldness in his voice. A few days after we spoke on the phone, he unfriended me. I asked him if I had done something to irritate him. His answer? No. I just don't have time for people I don't know personally as Facebook friends. His response seemed fair enough, but I knew he had friended me so that he could pry into my Facebook page, but once again I let it go. At this point I already knew something was off about him, but like I mentioned at the start, I wasn't at the best point in my life, and I figured what harm could there be in meeting him and actually confirming if I was right or not. Back then, I had the bad habit of always giving people the benefit of the doubt. Who knows, he could be completely different once we actually met in person. Fast forward a few months later, I had arrived in Europe about a week earlier and we were planning on meeting up that day. He's already coming up with excuses that he can't make it. It has to be in the evening after dinner. Keep in mind, after dinner in most European countries means 9 or 10, since many people have dinner quite late. I thought, okay, no big deal. Maybe his reasons are legit. I had seen a few red flags throughout the few months that we had spoken, but the major one came just minutes before we actually met. My plan was to have him park his car and we would walk to a coffee shop and talk. I had no intention of getting in his car. My mum had even told me to not get in his car right before I left to go meet him. I always told my parents where I was going and with who. As I waited in the hotel lobby, I get a call from him. Previously, I had mentioned to him that I just wanted to grab a coffee and chat, and he could park nearby and we could walk. He was calling to complain that he couldn't find a parking space, and there was no way he could leave his car anywhere. I insisted he keep looking, because I knew for a fact there were empty spaces nearby. This is when he lost his mind and began literally screaming down the phone. "Are you deaf? There are no spaces here." This person hadn't even met me yet, and they were already raging into my ear. His voice was aggressive, and this is where I feel even more stupid. Rational, smart me would have told him to piss off, blocked his number right there and then and be done with it. But vulnerable, stupid me just stood there like a moron and waited for him. A minute later, he pulls up and I meet him outside. He rolls down his window, but obviously, because of what happened, our interaction was cold and awkward. I once again mentioned that I would prefer if we found a parking spot and we could walk somewhere. This time he didn't blow up, but became sarcastic, repeating to me, "Oh, you want to walk somewhere?" saying it with a condescending tone. He repeated for me to get in, that we could just take a drive somewhere where we could find some place to have coffee, where he could park. He seemed like he had calmed down, but at that point, he was like a manipulative snake. My mum's words kept echoing in my head, but at the same time, I thought if something happened I could handle myself and just get out the car. On a side note, that's wrong. Ladies, never do this. Never, ever, under any circumstances, get into a car with someone who you don't know or trust. It sounds obvious, but sometimes we try to rationalize the situation like I did. That we're just being paranoid or overthinking, and feel like we can handle ourselves if the worst comes to worst. But from many stories I've heard, if you get into a car with someone who wants to harm you, your chances of getting out unharmed diminish drastically. Continuing on, I did get in. I feel emotional just sharing this now, thinking back to how stupid I was putting myself in a dangerous situation, especially after all the red flags were there. There were raging sirens, not just alarm bells. The whole time he had no expression on his face. I was trying so hard to read him, but I couldn't. His eyes were completely devoid of emotion. I asked him where we were going, and he didn't reply. He just kept driving through some old, dark and narrow cobblestone streets. I didn't take his silence for an answer, so I asked again. I've never been one to sit back and just be quiet. I can be annoying when I want to be, and that may have been what saved me that night. I kept badgering him, but he wouldn't respond. All he asked me was if, instead of coffee, we could get drinks. I told him I wasn't going to drink, because I'm not a big drinker, and obviously I didn't feel comfortable drinking with him. He didn't seem to like my answer. Once again, he would just repeat back to me what I had finished saying with a sarcastic tone, and he did this a few times while I was in his car. To try and lighten the mood, as if that were even possible, I took out a pack of gum and asked if he wanted one, at the same time just jesting to see his reaction. He said no, but again, with no emotion, just a poker face. He finally told me we were going to cross the bridge to the other side. This is a bridge that crosses the river from one city to the next. Think Manhattan and Brooklyn. I immediately began to pester him that I didn't want to go and that I would prefer to just stay in the area. He opens his window saying he needs air, and I ask him why. He said it was because I was giving him a headache. Good. At that moment he starts speeding, way above the speed limit on this narrow street, and up ahead there was nothing but a brick wall. I was so scared at that moment, everything was happening so fast. I had no idea why he was doing that, but my first thought was that he was going to end our lives. I actually thought he wanted to end his own and just have me in the car with him. Sounds a bit drastic, but you have to have been there to have understood it. I looked at him wide-eyed with total fear in my eyes. This was the first time I saw him smiling since I'd gotten into the car. It's like he got this sick pleasure from seeing me panic and in a state of complete fear. Perhaps it was just because he felt like he was in control of the situation again. At that moment, he slowed back down to normal driving speed. I was relieved, but I felt so afraid. I continued pestering him and told him firmly I didn't want to cross the bridge into the next city, and I said it repeatedly. At that moment, my mum calls me, asking me where I was, and I did not tell her I was in the psycho's car because I didn't want her to worry. I told her I was near the hotel and I was fine, even though I wasn't. Suddenly, by the grace of the Almighty, he told me he didn't want to deal with me anymore and was dropping me off. To this day, I have no idea what made him change his mind. Was it me being stubborn and irritating, and he figured someone like me would just give him a hard time? Or was it my mum's phone call? Maybe a little bit of both. Whatever the reason, I was relieved and thankful to whatever was watching over me. He dropped me off at the hotel entrance, and I immediately got out without saying a word. It was about 5 minutes of pure dread, but a bit anticlimactic. So sociopath who gave me the car ride from hell, let's not meet. In New Zealand, we have a lot of walks, and sometimes I like to just drive somewhere and go for a hike in the bush. Normally I just walk to a point and turn back, but tonight I decided to walk the entire track. This specific track goes from a visitor center at the top of a hill, then down a hill is the track which takes you past a large old abandoned railway that was once used to show off glowworms and now is just a rusting wreck. I decided to walk down the track. It was about 4:30 and it was starting to get dark, so I thought I would explore a bit and then walk back to my car. About 200 meters from the main station, there's an old tunnel used by the train. This tunnel has been abandoned coming up 3 years now, so I'm in the tunnel with my little lantern. This tunnel would not have been more than 500 meters long. While I was walking over the sound of my wet, slapping footsteps, I swear I could hear someone following me, breathing on me. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I stop in my tracks and swing around with my lantern. Nothing but a small bat of light from the tunnel opening. So I start to walk again, and the feeling returns, then over my own breath and the slapping of the footsteps. I heard something, not someone, a man with a deep voice. I heard in a dangerous whisper, "Get out." Didn't need to tell me twice. I felt my large frame running through this tunnel designed for a tiny train, and I heard footsteps behind me. The light of the mouth of the tunnel is getting larger and larger, and I feel the security of daylight wash over me. But then I trip over and fall down on my stomach while still in the tunnel. I feel this presence near me, and I tried to get back up, but my shoulder is killing me, and my legs have decided they don't want to work anymore. Then I felt it. Whatever it was, didn't want me there, and didn't want anyone there. I got up, covered in mud, down my front, into the safety of daylight, walking up the railroad looking like some awful extra on The Walking Dead. I reached the small station and managed to sit myself down on the long defunct station, sitting there trying to stretch my arms out so it won't hurt anymore, then stretch my legs. I looked up and to the left, and standing on the platform as if waiting for a train was this guy, dressed in brown overalls and what looked like a white shirt, looking dirty and disheveled. I looked back down at my foot and turned back to where he was a moment ago, but he was gone. I promise you I'm a big-framed guy and have never run so fast in my life. up the hill, through the thicket of the forest and back to the safety of the car park. I am now sitting in my car, trying to process what the hell just happened. I am a 35-year-old female, and my story takes place when I was 15, but it feels like yesterday. It was the day that would change my innocent youth forever. I am from a little village in Ireland, with a population of a few hundred. The nearest town is about 10 miles away. Growing up in rural Ireland was very idealistic. Summers were spent playing football with neighbours, or going to the lake swimming till the sun went down. I was lucky that even though the population is small and the houses far apart, my best friend's house was only down the road. So during those summer months, Mary and I were inseparable. My friend and I grew up with lots of brothers and sisters in a safe village. We were given a lot of freedom, and sometimes we were gone all day and only came back before dark. As it was the mid-90s, we had no mobiles, but our mums knew we would be okay and look out for each other. One thing we liked to do during these summers, besides going to the lake and hanging out at each other's houses, was go to town and look around the shops. The easiest way to get to town was to hitchhike, as there were no buses. Here in Ireland we call it thumbing. Hardly anyone hitches now because most households have 2 cars and parents are a lot more protective. But back in the 80s and 90s it was very common. Our parents were okay with it, but there were certain rules we had to follow. I am not entirely sure who came up with the rules, but I assume our parents did. Rule number 1, never hitch alone. You must thumb with at least 1 or 2 friends. Rule number 2, never take a lift if there are 2 or more men in the car, but 2 or more women is fine. Rule number 3, never take a lift from someone in a van. There could be more guys hiding in the back, or worse, ropes and blindfolds. Rule number 4, this was the most important rule. When a car stops to pick you up, always ask the driver where they're going first. If you tell them where you are going first, they could pretend they are going to the same place to lure you in. We were innocent but had common sense, so we followed the rules down to a T. At least, we tried to. My friend Mary and I used to hitch once a week during the summer. We would go to a town with a population of a few thousand and look around the shops, eat ice cream and hang out. When we got a ride, we had to make small talk with the driver. As 2 shy 15-year-olds, this bit sucked the most. To make it fair, we took turns sitting in the front and did most of the talking. One day, we spent a few hours in town. It was pretty uneventful, so we decided to thumb back. Around 3 p.m., we were at the usual spot that we used to hitch from, just on the outskirts of the town, where we were only waiting about 5 minutes when a car pulled up. Before we could ask where he was going, he asked us first. My friend told him, and he said he was passing through our village on the way to another one. Rule number 4 broken, but he seemed nice enough and just wanted to go home. It was my turn to sit in the front. The driver introduced himself as John, a farmer, and was super friendly. He was dressed in a worn t-shirt with holes in it. He had tattered pants and smelled of cow shit. The car was full of bits of straw and old and battered like the driver. He was about 60, had no wedding ring on, and don't ask me why I noticed these things, I just did. About halfway between town and our home village, he asked if we heard a noise. No, we replied. There it is again, sounds like a banging noise, he said. I didn't hear anything, so I just sat there quietly. Think it might be the exhaust pipe, he says. I'll have to pull it in and have a look. He pulled up on a busy road and went to have a look. I didn't hear anything, Mary said. He seems like a weirdo. Call it intuition, but even though he was super friendly and chatty, I just got a bad feeling from him. Next thing, he comes back to the driver's side and tells us the exhaust is hanging down and was hitting off the road. He says he needs us to help him tie it up. It was then I noticed he had string holding up his pants instead of a belt. I thought this was odd. Anyway, he got some string off the boot, which was the same color as his belt, and we both got out the car. He showed us the exhaust pipe hanging down and used a rag to hold it up because it was hot. My friend Mary took over holding it up while he secured it with string. They were both kneeling while I just stood back and watched. It was then that I noticed his fly was open and I could see his member. He clearly wasn't wearing any underwear. He didn't even have a belt on. So I guess I wasn't surprised, and in my head I just thought, oh man, what is going on? But I said nothing. I just stood there in shock. Mary hadn't noticed at this stage and just continued to hold the pipe. When John was standing up, he noticed his fly was open and acted shocked. Oh girls, I'm so sorry and embarrassed. I only have a safety pin holding the fly together and it must have come off. Please forgive me and get back in the car. Mary was stunned because she got a close-up of his privates, which left me to do the talking. I told him it was okay and that it was an accident, so we got back in the car. He fastened the safety pin, even though I didn't see him look for it. It was all hidden again. Back in the car, the atmosphere was very different. We both felt mortified, and he kept apologizing over and over. I looked out the passenger window and just repeated, "It's okay." Then he says something that turned my stomach. "Well, girls, you're taking it all very well. If I didn't know any better, I'd swear you liked it." Then he nudged me in the arm with his, like you would a friend. I looked at him through the corner of my eye with my face still facing the window, when I noticed his fly was undone again, and he was exposed once more. He must have noticed me looking because he says, "Oh, sorry, the safety pin keeps opening. Just don't look." Fine by me, I thought, but okay. And I continued to look out the window. He continued nudging me. "Don't be looking, don't be looking," giggling at the same time. He was doing this in a playful way, almost as if it were a hilarious joke. Mary started giggling too because she laughs when she's nervous. I knew it wasn't her fault, but I was starting to get angry. He wouldn't stop telling me to stop looking. Then he said, "Your friend is laughing. She must be enjoying the view." This made her laugh even harder. Now remember, we are both polite 15-year-olds that always respect our elders and are a little shy, so I would never speak up to an adult. The nudging in the arm and my friend laughing was all getting too much. He then asked, "Is this the first Willy you've seen?" and told me once again to stop looking. I was turning facing the passenger window so much that I had my back to him. There's no way I could be looking. I lost my temper. I shouted at the top of my voice, "I'm not looking. Mary, stop laughing." Silence followed. He said he was sorry, that he was only joking, and that I didn't need to be so serious. I said nothing and sat there, red with temper. I should have told him to let us out. I should have told him to cover himself up, the dirty old perv. But I was in shock too, and part of me wanted to believe it was all an innocent mistake. We finally arrived at our tiny village, safe. We got out, and he said that he was sorry about the whole thing. My friend got her voice back and assured him it was okay. I said it was okay and not to worry about it, and thanked him for the lift regardless. What he said back sickened me. He looked me up and down with this creepy smile and said, "Girlies, thanks for everything," and drove off. We were left speechless. We sat down on a nearby bench to process all of this before going home. We made a deal we wouldn't tell our parents, or they'd never let us hitchhike again. My friend got her voice back and repeated, "Pervert, sicko, smelly twat." He had this planned the whole time, over and over, about 5 minutes after sitting down on the bench. Who drives by going the direction we just came from? Only pervert Farmer John, waving and smiling, while we sat, stunned. He had beeped to catch our attention. So much for passing through our village. A few months later, and the ordeal went to the back of my mind. Occasionally we would talk about Farmer John, but we made jokes about it, and we told some of our friends what happened. One day I told a friend of mine named Brid. A cousin of hers had told a very similar story. The cousin lived in another village about 20 miles in the other direction from town. She was a few years older than us. While hitchhiking home one day, the same thing happened to her and her friend. The exhaust, the safety pin, and the undone fly. It was no accident, and my worst fears were confirmed. Farmer John really had other things in mind. So to the man that reeks, has worn clothes, and uses string to hold up his pants, and enjoys exposing himself, let's not meet again. This story happened when I was working the 150-mile line between Nashville and Chattanooga, Tennessee. I was working a local job on the run called the Cowan Pusher, with the mountain grade starting at Cowan and basically going all the way to Chattanooga. It can be a difficult stretch of railroad. I had the third shift on the Cowan Pusher. It was all I can hold, even if I didn't enjoy working nights. We basically just sat in the shop and waited to be called to help heavy tonnage trains get to Sherwood, Tennessee. Now all I can say about Sherwood is picture the hills have eyes with banjos added in. On the night in question it was about 11:50 p.m. when a heavy freight train stopped over at Sherwood and requested our help to get over the other side of the mountain. We climbed on the engines and got on our way. By the time we hit Cowan, we started curving up the foot of the mountain. We had no visibility of any kind, and the only thing that was illuminated was by locomotive light. We had a 30-minute ride ahead of us, along with a 2-mile-long dark tunnel in our paths. As the clock struck midnight, we were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods filled with wolves, rattlesnakes, and a few mountain folk. Most of the mountain folk are nice, but don't let the sun set on your ass in those woods. About 10 minutes later, the north portal of the tunnel was in sight. A bridge hung in the entrance. A bridge hung over the entrance. A branch line that was taking up long ago crossed it, going to another part of the mountains. The bridge is still accessible by ATV. As I looked up, I saw a campfire and people. They all looked to be dressed darkly, maybe even in masks. All I could see was white in the faces. As we started under the bridge, we heard a thud over our heads on the locomotive roof. We proceeded through the dark tunnel and slowed just out of the south portal as the conductor looked out the back door with his flashlight. He saw nothing, so we shrugged our shoulders and proceeded on the last 10 minutes to our waiting train. It was 12:20 a.m., and we coupled on the rear of the train to push it from Sherwood. As the engineer on the head end entered the south portal of the tunnel, he radioed back for me, talking about figures standing over the tunnel entrance. However, no one was there as it came into my sight. As we exited the north portal, I looked to the best of my ability to see on my side of the tracks for whatever we had hit with our roof. I saw what looked like a black cloak fluttering in the wind as we passed, but couldn't really tell. As we entered Cowan, we uncoupled on the fly, and the train continued to Nashville. We cruised on into our parking track and tied our engines down. As we got off, we had the feeling of being watched, but thought nothing of it as we parked our asses in the office chairs. We had no more work for the rest of our shift. We spoke and napped on and off until about 3 a.m., but never shook the feeling of being watched. So we stepped outside, and I put a pinch of my drip in my lip, and my conductor lit a cigarette. As we both chatted with each other, we noticed movement in the brush across the tracks. Now I must remind you all that both my conductor and myself are big country boys who certainly don't scare very easily. We went over to investigate, and we found 3 hooded men in the bushes. With a huge spot of my tobacco, I asked them, "What are you doing here? You understand you're trespassing on railroad property?" The lead guy then spoke in a demonic gravelly voice. "We just want what's ours." As he said this, he motioned to the top of the locomotive. We looked to see a young man on the roof at the air horn. The young man was in nothing but underwear, and as we looked at him, he bolted off the roof and climbed off and ran down the tracks. The figures then turned to chase him. The lead guy turned his head back towards us with glowing eyes that we could now see. He hustled. Then he gave chase with his friends. We called the police, and after hours of investigation, they found the man's underwear, no traces of him or the cloaked individuals. We even took them up the mountain. Cops love free train rides. There was nothing. Now on occasion we'll find dead animals by the shop door or locomotive, mutilated. I've even found 1 or 2 at my door at home. We still occasionally see that same fire on the bridge and get the feeling of being watched, but it's all gone by the time we return. There's definitely a cult somewhere on the mountains. To begin, this started when I was 14. I'm female, and I'm now 21. I just transferred to a new high school in the middle of the school year as a freshman with my twin sister. I was enrolled into a Spanish 2 class where I met Tony, and that is where the obsession began. But when I started my class and met Tony, I instantly thought he was attractive. He was tall, had brown hair, and beautiful eyes for a guy. Also, was a year my senior, but I did notice he was extremely shy and kind of awkward, but I made up excuses to speak with him, asking him about homework and other meaningless small talk. He took to me and asked if I wanted to walk around during lunch and talk. I happily agreed. He was obviously not very confident and didn't know how to initiate conversation. So I did most of the talking. I even went as far as asking him for his phone number. After a few days of texting and talking, I can tell he doesn't have any friends, and he's kind of negative and has a pessimistic view towards life. It was rather draining and disappointing. Things he would say were kind of unsettling, or I guess just unusual for me. He would text me fantasizing about being a superhero, kind of like roleplay, in which I was the damsel in distress and he was my savior, and text me somewhat similar to those choose your own adventure, always ending in the damsel and the hero kissing/being together. He had an obsession with Slasher from the Scream movies, but overall he was a nice guy, a bit different to what I was expecting and attracted to. Time passes. Valentine's Day is coming up. We're talking practically every day, so he asks me to be his Valentine. I agree somewhat reluctantly. So it's Valentine's Day. He walks up to me and gives me a pack of Hershey's Kisses with some Twizzlers. I don't like Twizzlers. So I hand them back to him, gave him a kiss on the cheek, and went to my class. Yes, I know that it was kind of a nasty move, but I was honestly losing interest in him at that point, and I told him before I didn't like red vines or any candy like that. During the day I received more gifts, flowers and candy from other friends, and I see Tony and I can tell he's extremely upset by this, but doesn't say anything. He messages me later in the day saying how stupid he felt, and how he was outdone by everyone else, but I didn't respond. Over the next few weeks, I gradually talked to him less and less. Class is awkward, and I can tell he wants to say something to me but never does. I later learned from my twin sister that he asked her every single day about me, if I'm talking to someone else, if I like him and how to win me over, confiding in her that he has never even spoken to a girl before. And at first I think it's sweet, but I still no longer had any romantic interest in him. We would talk at school occasionally, he would bring me homemade cookies, walk me to the train station, and still text and try to call me in the evenings after school. But I was talking to someone new who eventually became my boyfriend for the rest of high school, Brandon. When I started dating Brandon, I knew that Tony was absolutely devastated. He then started telling people around school that I was his first kiss, and I was confused because I didn't know a kiss on the cheek counted as a first kiss. But to each their own. It was somewhat upsetting because people were getting the impression that we dated, or that I had played him, which certainly wasn't the case. I would still talk to Tony as a friend. He was in the same grade and classes as my new boyfriend, and he would always tell me how much he thought Brandon didn't like him, and that he felt Brandon knew about us. I told Tony there was nothing to know about us because we weren't anything but friends, and Brandon was still totally chill and non-confrontational. Not in his nature to stir up drama over nothing, and definitely isn't the jealous type. The school year was coming to an end, and Tony comes running up to me after the last day of school and hands me this 60 to 70 page notebook, wide-ruled, explaining all the ways he's in love with me, and how everyone at the school thinks poorly of me, and how he can treat me better. I read it once, showed my twin, and she tells me how weird and uncomfortable it makes her. We both agree on that. I stash it away and don't speak of it to anybody. I act like nothing happened, and I still talk to him as a friend occasionally. I worked a lot in high school in my free time, and spent a lot of time with my boyfriend and friends, so didn't think much of Tony. Time goes by. We eventually pretty much cease all communication. I see him around school and he never really is with anybody else. He's usually always alone, which I don't find strange anymore, considering how awkward and quiet he can be. Another year goes by. I'm a junior. Tony and Brandon are both seniors getting ready to graduate, and Tony texts me out the blue and tells me he's written a book and it would mean the world if I would be the first to read it and give him feedback. Being the person that I am, I agree. So he comes up to me at school the next day and hands me this fat notebook and tells me to take my time reading it and give him honest feedback when I was finished. I read this story in 4 class periods, and it was around 300 pages long. The story takes place in a Game of Thrones era. The 3 main characters are Eric, Tony, Alva, me, and Isaac, Brandon. For the sake of confusion, I'll be referring to the characters by our names. The only reason I know the characters were us, and not fictional, was simply by the way he described them, literally identical to our physical appearances. Tony was the son of the king, or whatever, and the rest of us were mere peasants. But Tony was always in love with me, but I was with Brandon. It was the annual time where our kingdom would go to battle with another for honor, glory, gladiator style. Tony thought it would be wonderful to prove himself and volunteered. The night before our kingdom traveled to where the battle would commence, my character went to Tony in the middle of the night to express her love and fear, and they ended up having a very graphic night of passion. It was truly disturbing. The next day after they had arrived at the place of battle, my character was sent to his room, where the same graphic encounter occurred again. And during, Brandon came looking for my character, in which we were caught. My character told Tony I didn't really love him, and ran to Brandon to apologize for being a harlot. Tony was devastated and ultimately let his opponent kill him in battle because he couldn't handle the loss of losing the love of his life. Our kingdom goes back home. and it's in the middle of the night that Brandon sneaks through the window and murders me. He slits my throat. The end. As you can imagine, I was absolutely horrified and creeped out. I threw the book away and never told Tony what I thought about it. He must have known, because he never asked for it back. Tony and Brandon both graduate, and life goes on. Tony didn't try and reach out to me for a few years, until I was around 20. He messaged me on Instagram in the middle of the night. He said, and I quote, "Show me your feet. Submit to daddy. I always looked at your feet at school and would fantasize about them," along with links to a few foot fetish websites. I promptly blocked him. The next day, he messaged me on another account, a foot fetish and bondage account he ran. He asked me why I blocked him, and I blocked him again. Earlier last year, on my new account, he messages me basically calling me a harlot again, and how he wishes I would pass away, and how he hated everyone we went to school with and hoped that they would all pass away as well, and how he fantasized how he would end me for all the pain I caused him. I was genuinely afraid, but I didn't know how to handle this situation. Was it a mortal threat? I don't know. I later learned that he worked at a diner down the street from my apartment. I avoided it at all costs. I have since moved, and I haven't heard from Tony since, but multiple girls I went to high school with told me he was obsessed with me, and would constantly talk about me to them, and how he would message them the same disgusting things while he was on a drunken stupor. Anyway, Tony, let's not meet again. I live in Massachusetts, in a populated city, so I mostly rely on public transportation to get to places. This included the subway, and living here nearly all my life, I have many stories regarding the subway, such as a guy sitting next to me and touching himself, a woman punching me in the face, and the story that I'm about to share with you now. Me and most of my friends would rely on public transportation to get ourselves to school. This happened in our sophomore year. Our high school was placed smack dab in the middle of the city and around some colleges. I had a friend who would go home with me every day, and we both used the subway. Living in a populated area, I was aware of the potential creeps and dangerous people. It was around 5 p.m. during the winter time, and it was quickly getting dark. After our club was finished, me and my friend began our journey to the subway station. This included walking through a college campus and many streets. It was usually less than a 15-minute walk to the station, so we would just talk and mind our business. Halfway through our walk, I had a feeling that someone was behind us, which wasn't surprising, since it could have been other students, and this was a heavily populated place. Me and my friend were slow walkers, so I was basically waiting for this person to pass us like the others would. Although I waited for a long time and still felt this person on our tail, when we got to a crosswalk they were still behind us, so quickly and slightly I turn around and take a peek at them. My heart started beating faster when I glanced at them. At first I thought they were wearing a ski mask, but I was mistaken. They wore a black beanie and a black scarf, tightly wrapped around their mouth and nose. He was about 50 years old or older, and had a dark green windbreaker on, along with baggy black pants. What irked me a little was how close he was to me and my friend, less than 5 feet away, and I was terrified that I was going to accidentally smack him with my JanSport backpack, which I've always had stuffed with textbooks and things. Me and my friend crossed the road, and as we continued to walk I became more and more wary. He was a lot closer to us now than before, and he wore heavy Timberland boots, which would crush and pound against the salt on the snow. As a girl, I've always felt insecure about my body, and I was just terrified for me and my friend, since all this man could see was the back of both of us. most likely oogling us. Note that we're both 14 years old and super passive, so confronting this person was the last thing I wanted to do. I saw my friend would glance at her phone every now and then and go on it to respond to texts, so I ended up texting her. Man behind us. Creepy. It's been like 10 minutes. She replies, I noticed. I don't know what to do. Since we were on a college campus, there were often large tours given by people and crowds of tourists. We began walking at a faster pace and I heard his footsteps quicken as well. I leaned in and whispered to her, walk through the crowd and take an immediate right on a different path that we'd never take to the station. It just led to a different gate exiting the college, and outside of the gate we'd be about 50 feet away from the subway station. So we did exactly that. Walked through a crowd of about 40 to 50 tourists by a popular statue. And after we were speed walking by this point, I looked behind me to check whether he was still behind us, and fortunately he was not. We then proceeded to walk down the stairs towards the station, still shaken by what happened. We paid to get through the gates and then got onto the platform of the train that would take us home. There was a certain exit I liked to take at the station. I would get off to go home. So we walked further towards the left side of the platform with more benches. We found an empty bench somehow amidst the large crowd on the platform. It was Friday after all, and nearly 6, and I sat on the right and my friend sat on the left. Not 30 seconds after we sat down, I felt a presence standing right next to me at the bench. It was him. I saw the Timberlands. Not only that, he was just facing me, heavy breathing and staring down. I saw his shoes pointing at me and his baggy black pants stuffed within his boots. I was terrified and nudged my friend, and she was on her phone. She was holding her phone but froze and didn't continue to click on anything. Just as we were frozen in our trance, the announcement started to play, stating the train was arriving. We both shot up as the train began to come through, and I took her arm, proceeding to lean her to the right side of the platform and through the crowd. We stood in front of the doors of a train cart along with many others. I looked to my right and there he was, in front of another train door to our right. Each train cart came within 3 pairs of doors that would automatically open and close. We chose the middle door and thought it would be odd that he was kind of on the right door instead of following us in. Then I thought that he would probably isolate himself and follow us off the train cart at our stop. I looked up at the train board to see that another train was going in 2 minutes, and as the train doors opened, people began to spill out. I waited for everyone to shuffle out, and the group at his door had already shuffled out, so he was in the cart already. I still held my friend's arm and made to go into the cart last, standing in front of the doors. There were less people on the train, but all of the seats were taken, and there were 1 to 2 empty per row. I could see him on the right side of the cart staring at us. The train would make a warning noise that would be about 3 beeps, indicating they were about to close. The beeps were half seconds. At the first beep, I instantly yanked me and my friend out the cart and back onto the platform. The doors quickly closed, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The train cart started moving within 5 seconds, but within those 5 seconds, horrifyingly enough, the man sprinted to the closed doors, which had 2 transparent windows, and stared down at me and my friend. We backed up immediately. He still had the beanie and scarf on, but all I could see were his menacing eyes. Then he started banging on the glass, making both of us jump, but it was cut short as the train started leaving. Still looking at him banging on the glass as the train moved in the tunnel, my friend fell to the floor and started crying. There weren't many people on the platform since everyone boarded the train, and I began to console her and tear up as well. We were both young and oblivious to everything. I helped her, and we got the next train and sat down blankly staring out the windows across from us, which showed the dark subway tunnels in motion. Afterwards, we were near our homes and parted ways. We never told anyone about this, although we should have, thinking back on it all. I met up with the same friends a few days ago, and we were all reminded of this event. I'm glad that we're both safe and out of harm's way, but I just felt so stupid knowing that I could have gotten someone's attention since we were near big crowds, or possibly a security guard. So creepy guy who follows two underage girls home? Let's not meet. On 2 previous occasions, I had picked up a lady that was hitchhiking with her kids. The lady was a con artist, and not a very good one, who had trained her children to be part of her con, with scripted dialogue. This story happened about 2 years after I had last forced her out of my car outside a police station. On the day in question, I was driving alone. I was nearing a traffic circle in my hometown when 2 young ladies jumped in front of my car, forcing me to stop. The 2 ladies claimed that some guy had been chasing them and I needed to get them away from there. I live in South Africa, a country best known for its crime. This also happened around the same time that there was a man going around my town harassing women, and I happened to be in the same area the last attack had occurred. Overall, I didn't think twice about unlocking the car and letting them in. The 2 girls looked around the same age, with one being very slim and the other leaning towards the larger variety. The skinny one got in the front seat and the bigger one in the back. The one in front was called Jen and the one in the back Kiara. I asked them if I should drive them to the police station, but Kiara said no and asked me to drive them into town. Apparently their boyfriends would meet them there. Jen hadn't said a word since getting in. I was driving in the town's direction when the following dialogue occurred between them. "Friend, I don't want to sleep on the street tonight. I know, don't worry, God will provide a miracle. But where will that miracle come from? Maybe he's already sent it." Bear in mind, this dialogue has been translated from Afrikaans. Now, to most, this would have sounded like an obvious ploy. They'd ignore it and simply try and get the girls out. To me, though, this meant something more. You see, the moment Jen had spoken her first line, alarm bells started going off in my head. I'd heard this dialogue before. Not more or less, but the same dialogue, the exact same one. It was then I recognized her. She was the daughter of a female hitchhiker I had picked up a few years prior, who had used those exact words and had spoken it between her and her mother. I never mentioned the mother's name, but she introduced herself as Natasha. I continued driving, but cut their conversation short. So I say, "So how's Natasha?" Kiara, obviously taken back by my question. Who's Natasha?" "You know, Jen's mother, Natasha." Jen was completely silent again. "No, she's not Jen's mother." "Really? That's interesting. And don't you know her at all then?" "No, I mean, I know her, but we don't know her." Jen was sobbing now. "Won't you please help us? We're hungry and can't afford food." I looked at Kiara and wanted to make a snarky remark, but decided that was beneath me. Kiara had now started up too and was trying to fake cry. Jen was the much better actress. Some dialogue ensued with them asking for money and me refusing. I don't remember the exact line exchange. Eventually I softened up and took them to the McDonald's drive-thru. They both ordered the most expensive meals they could see on the menu, and I paid in cash, which was a stupid mistake. As we were waiting in the drive-thru, as this is South Africa and usually does take a while, Kiara asked if she could borrow my phone to send a message to her boyfriend to say that she'll be there soon. I sighed and handed her my phone. The food eventually came and we continued driving. I was getting pretty uncomfortable and wanted to get them out my car. Then they started asking for money again and more of the same dialogue ensued. Next thing I know, Kiara was starting to seductively massage my shoulders from behind. Her voice had softened and she was now talking in a seductive tone. I pulled the car to an abrupt stop and told her, but politely and firmly, "Get your hands off me." Kiara didn't listen and started to move her hands lower down. I said, and I was cut off by Jen saying, "Listen to him, Kiara." He said no. She obliged and removed her hands. "Give me my phone back. Why do you even still have it?" She protested for a moment and handed it back quickly and looked around for my wallet. "Where's my wallet?" "We don't have your wallet. I put it right next to me. It's no longer here. Where is it?" "We didn't steal your wallet." "I'm going to count to 10. And then what? You're going to take it from us? 2 young girls alone with you in your car after we were almost just assaulted? Who's going to believe you over us?" I was silent for a few seconds, considering my options. Strangely enough, they were right. The scales were not tipped in my favor here. I told them to just get out the car. Kiara protested, but Jen quickly obliged and made Kiara follow. I sped off as quickly as I could, livid. I got home still blazing and took a while to cool off. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of me. I took out the cell phone, went into my sent items, and the following text is what she had sent. "We have one. We're bringing him to you now. Almost there." Whatever the sender had replied, she had been smart enough to delete, but had obviously forgotten about the sent items. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I'd have driven them down all the way to where they'd asked me to go. I really don't want to know. Oh, and I did eventually find my wallet under the car seat. All the cash, of course, was gone. I took an Uber from my school play rehearsal, which ended at 8:30, to the train station. The train came at 9:17, and I decided to just wait there until the train came, because I didn't want to Uber home, then do nothing for 10 minutes, then take another Uber to the train station. My mum couldn't drive me because she was at dinner with my grandma. I'm waiting at the train station, and I was around 15 years old and 5'3". You see, I was taking the train down to my dad's house for the weekend. It was raining, and so I was sitting on the bench under a cover on the platform. I was just listening to music and chilling when there was a man who looked to be in his late 20s to early 30s sitting on the other side of the bench. He had jet black hair which was soaked and messy, and was wearing a red button-up flannel, what looked like Dickies work pants, a pair of high-top yellow Converse, and a poncho. He was mumbling to himself and looked over at me and caught me staring. He looked at me with crazy eyes and then averted his gaze back to his shoes. I was kind of afraid of him, since he could easily overpower me or take me, but I tried to put those thoughts to the back of my mind. Perhaps it was a hint for me to stop looking at him. By this point it was 9 o'clock. A few minutes of me feeling awkward, and the guy increasingly aggressively starts to mumble, so I stand up and move to another bench. I was just about to sit down when I saw a sign that the train was going to be delayed for a further 20 to 30 minutes due to the rain. After seeing that, and giving out a big sigh, I opted to walk to a nearby sandwich shop, which was about a minute or so walk away. I got to the sandwich place and ordered my sandwich and sat down. After being almost halfway done with my food, I saw the man who was on the platform walk in. He ordered a salad and sat directly across from me and looked at me. I didn't look back at him, but I felt his eyes on me. It was kind of like that scene in an awful horror movie, where 2 girls are sitting at a table in a restaurant and a clown is staring down at them. After a minute or so of him staring at me, he decided to eat his salad. I'm not sure why, but then he moved his arm to grab his fork on the table. In panic, I flinched and knocked the AUX cable out of my phone. The music started playing out the speaker, and I quickly turned it off. He looked at me and said, "Oh, you like corn?" I was kind of surprised he said something to me. Instead of just staring, I responded with, yeah. I noticed he kept looking me up and down, and was about to say something, but then I grabbed my stuff and walked out. He does some sort of annoying groan, and I hear him walk behind me. I start to speed walk, and I practically burst through the door of the restaurant. "Where are you going?" The train platform? Oh, I could just drive you to where you want to go. Why are you at the station then? What do you mean? You literally sat 3 feet away from me on a bench and we made eye contact. That wasn't me. Yeah, sure. You still want to ride? I'm good, thanks. Come on, I'll pay for gas and we can spend time together. I mean, what is a girl like you doing here? Just leave me alone, dude, I'm fine. Whatever, dude. I walked up to the platform, sat down on a bench and waited. I didn't see where the man went and was kind of on edge. After a few minutes, the man came up, sat on the opposite side of the bench, and I stood up and started to walk away to another bench. I heard the guy shout something at me, but I'd had enough, turned and walked up to the curb. I called my brother to pick me up and go to my dad's house tomorrow. As the call was ringing, the man walked up behind me, grabbed the phone out my hand, and I ran to grab it, and he dodged me. I heard my brother answer my call and say hi or something like that, and I kicked the guy in his privates, grabbed my phone, and sprinted a few blocks away, telling my brother to collect me now. My brother came and fetched me, and that was the end of it. Although my phone was kind of slimy after the guy grabbed it. I never saw the man again. So guy in a weird purple poncho, with goo on his hands? Let's not meet again. This just happened 5 months ago, and it's quite fresh in my mind. I am a 23-year-old female who met with Jason, a 29-year-old male, on an app last September. We clicked immediately, and from then went out about once a week, sometimes twice. I've spent the past year going on dates out to nice restaurants, garden walks, and spending the nights. We've established that we had feelings for each other about 2 months into everything. Though we've had our rocky moments, and I didn't fully trust him. At one point, I wanted to date, but he claimed he was too busy with work, which subsequently caused us to separate for a while. Once we eventually came back together, I told him I didn't want to be exclusive, but we could still hang out as I enjoyed his company. Now, there was always some sneaking suspicions that there was another partner in his life, because he always paid in cash wherever we went, and was very secretive about his private life. I had voiced these thoughts to him, but honestly didn't care too much because he told me he wasn't interested in dating me after I started seeing another partner and was using protection with both of them. Meanwhile, he didn't want to date me, but raged whenever he thought there was another man around my life. He had established some concerning and possessive behaviors, but I let them slide for the most part because I was still doing whatever I wanted. Fast forward to tonight, 14 months after we met. We went to a really nice restaurant downtown after work, and I asked if he wanted to take the subway back to my place since we had a few drinks. We stopped by his car to grab his bag, and off we went to the station. When we got to the station, he said he forgot his card in the car, and I figured it was no biggie and swiped for him. I said he didn't need to pay me back because it was like $2, but he insisted he would Venmo me. When we get to my apartment, I told him he was welcome to take a shower, and he went to the bathroom. I was messing around on my phone and saw CS had sent me $2 for the train. It was weird to me because his initials are JN, so I clicked on his Vino friends list. He had about 20 Vino friends, and I picked a random person and looked them up on Facebook. I went down their friends list, and would you look at that, a picture of Jason and his brothers. The only issue was his name was Chase Smith. The photo did look a little different because he was about 50 to 60 pounds heavier in the photograph and is currently very fit, but I was 90% sure it was him. Just to confirm, I googled his name and the area around which he lived and got a hit on White Pages. It said he was related to Velma and Shaggy Smith, and I remembered him telling me that his siblings were named Velma and Shaggy. So it turned out I didn't even know the name of the guy I've been boinking for a year. He got out the shower and sat down on my bed. I was quiet and looked at his face, asking, "Is your real name Chase Smith?" This guy looked me dead in the eye and said, "No, I lost it." I made like the "leave Brittany alone" guy. I looked cool, calm and collected and started crying and telling him to get out my house. He approached me and I told him not to touch me, but he grabbed my wrists and insisted that we talk about it. I told him to leave and never come back, but he refused to leave for a while until eventually he did. Afterwards, I looked a little deeper and found out he has a criminal record, though I can't see what they're from. From his past behaviors, I'm honestly a little worried for my safety, because I immediately blocked him on everything and know for a fact he's going to go crazy when he realizes he can't contact me. Everything has been a lie. When you think you know someone, it turns out they're probably crazy. In any case, my sister continued to sleuth. Turns out today he slightly changed the spelling of his last name on Facebook, probably to deter others he's been messing with to find his profile. He doesn't know how I found him and doesn't realize that the spelling of his last name wasn't relevant in the process. The dude is an actual psycho who's probably doing this to multiple women. I'm honestly more afraid for them than myself, because they clearly don't know what's going on if he's taking further steps to hide himself. I wish I knew who they were, so that I could warn them. My friend enjoys riding the subway while listening to, or rather eavesdropping, on other people's conversations. She says it's better than listening to music, and she gets to hear most crazy gossips and stories. One of these days she was riding the subway to work and overheard two girls having a chat. One started saying how she would much rather ride the subway in Sao Paulo, which I should mention is where me and my friend are from, than in other cities such as New York or London. According to this girl, since in those cities the subway is constantly open, late nights and early mornings are not really safe, and the weirdest thing happened to her in the London tube one night. She was alone in the train going back to her Airbnb after a party when 3 people got inside the same carriage as her. It was 2 guys and a girl, and they were making out hard. The girl was being a total boss between the guys because she was getting all the kissing and rubbing. They all looked a little crazy, walking funny, and you could clearly see that they were on something. After a while, the girl notices the making out lady was staring at her, so she couldn't tell if she was jealous or inviting her to join in. So she tried to avoid eye contact. Some stations pass and a homeless guy enters the same cart. He looked at the girl and the other people decided to sit by her. By then, the girl could feel something was wrong. There was something in the air, she couldn't quite say what. As the next station comes, as soon as the door opens, the homeless guy grabs the girl by the arm and drags her out. It was so fast, they were both already a bit far from the cart when she starts screaming for help. The homeless guy looks at her in surprise and says something along the lines of, "Why are you screaming? Couldn't you see what was going on? Can't you see I saved your life?" That girl, between the 2 men, she wasn't blinking. They were carrying a corpse. Unfortunately, this is where the story ends, because the girl who was telling it to my friend got out on her station. But oh boy, girl from the crazy tube ride, if you're listening, I'd love to know what happened and know if the guys got arrested. This story took place when I was 23 years old, nearly 10 years ago. I was living in upstate New York in a very rural area with my ex-boyfriend and his family. He and I used to argue quite a bit. One morning before he went to work, he and I got into a very heated argument. He was 20 years my senior, but during this particular fight, he acted majorly juvenile. He jumped out of bed, flipped the bird and yelled, "If you didn't like it so much, then why don't you go back to the Bronx?" That was all the prompting I needed. I threw on my Uggs and my winter jacket, grabbed my cigarettes, and flew out the house. I am unfortunately very impulsive and didn't think to grab my cell phone before I stormed out. I didn't drive, so my only option was to walk. I don't think at the time that I intended to walk back to the Bronx, as I was a 3-hour car ride upstate, but I just needed to go for an angry, dramatic walk. I realized once I got to the road at the entrance of the trailer park that I had no idea where anything really was around me, as I'd only lived there a few months, and at that point we really didn't go out a lot. I banked left and just walked and walked where I knew civilization was. I found myself walking alongside a very busy stretch of road, with 18-wheelers flying by, spraying me with slushy snow and soaking my shoes. I then saw my boyfriend driving out on his way to work, and he sped up as he drove past me, evidently still angry about our fight. I thought for sure he was going to turn around at some point, but he never came back. I pressed on, deciding instead to walk to my best friend's mother's house, which I knew to be in the same town. It started to snow, and I was losing momentum. I passed by a VFW, where a nondescript pickup truck was parked in the driveway. It wasn't until I passed it that I even realized the driver was in the front seat. He called out to me, "Hey honey, do you need help?" My stomach churned, realizing I would have to accept this stranger's offer. I approached his truck slowly and tried to weigh out my options. He was a clean-cut, seemingly normal older white guy with grey hair, greenish blue eyes, and just average looking. "Are you a good or bad guy?" I blurted out, and cringed at myself for asking such a dumb question. "Ha, I'm one of the good guys. I wouldn't tell you if I were a bad guy." I ignored the bells going off in my head, and I got in the front seat with him. As we drove, I realized I had no clue where my friend's mum actually lived. I knew the name of the road she lived on, but it spanned a good distance, so it wasn't very helpful in terms of finding my destination. I asked to borrow his cell phone so I could try calling my best friend to ask her where I was going. I called her 3 times and she didn't answer, probably because she didn't recognize the number. I started to feel inexplicably hopeless. After a few minutes, he asked me where I was from and why I was out in the middle of nowhere in the snow wearing pajamas. I explained I was originally from the Bronx and that I had gotten into a fight with my boyfriend. He paused and said, "Hey, you wouldn't be interested in making a little money, would you?" I chuckled nervously and said, "Oh, no thanks. Well, I just figured since you were from the Bronx," and trailed off. Realizing at that moment I was definitely in it deep, I muttered, "Oh, sure." He eyed me up and down and laughed to himself before sneering, Sure, she says." I started to panic big time, but knew I couldn't show my fear. I scoured the scenery for a pillowy snowbank that I could land in if I leapt out of the truck, to no avail. The houses were so few and far between, I became certain this would be how I met my demise. I'll never know why, but it was at this point that he decided to ask me who I was going to see. I quickly blurted out my best friend's mum's name and her husband's full name. He instantly parked up and explained that he knew the husband and how they used to snowmobile together 20 years ago. I felt the greatest wave of relief when he explained that he knew exactly where his old buddy lived. When we finally pulled up to that big yellow house, it was like arriving at the promised land. I sheepishly asked his name, Steve. He then asked mine. I gave him a fake name, spat out "thank you," and ran out as quickly as I could from his truck to the porch. I crashed through the front door and locked it behind me. Immediately I started crying, running through the house and trying to find my friend's mum. I had awoken her from a sound sleep, but she didn't say a word upon seeing how shaken up I was. Once I knew I was safe with her, I explained everything: the fight, the fleeing, the weird guy, and his proposition. And she listened, horrified and curious at the same time. She made me promise never to do anything so reckless again, and that if I needed her, to call her. She told me she would ask her husband when he got home about this Steve guy and find out more about him. I returned to my boyfriend's later that day and got really stoned to try to forget about the events of that morning. The following day, my friend's mum called me to tell me that Steve was a dangerous person who her husband had cut off communication with years ago. The last he had heard about Steve was that he had been arrested for assaulting a woman. She then went on to point out how incredibly easy it would have been for him to hurt me and leave me just about anywhere on some lonely stretch of road, and no one would have even known where to look for me. Not to mention, I might not have even been found until the snow thawed out. So Steve, you major creep, thanks for the lift, but let's not meet again. My car had just perished, and my brother and I were stranded downtown. It was late around 9:30, and we didn't want to disturb anyone to call for a ride, so we tried to take the train home. We were waiting on the tracks when I gestured with my foot to where my brother needed to go get his ticket. A guy that was roughly 10 yards away from us ran up and said, "You kicking at me?" No, Are you kicking at me?" he interrupted. "No, I was just pointing with my foot." "You trying to be a smart ass with me?" "No," I said, looking visibly annoyed. He left and we went to buy our tickets. He started to walk towards the ticket machine, so we walked further down the station. He came up to us after trying to use the machine and said, "Which one of you hexed my card?" We obviously didn't hex his card, so we just started to walk off. He stopped us and said if we didn't believe in hexes, we would by tonight, and told us that the last person he hexed felt like they had spiders crawling out their mouths. When we started ignoring him, he said that he could do more than hex us. He can pull out his firearm when people start to ignore him, so he motioned to his waist by grabbing his belt. He brushed up his shirt too high, and we could see there was nothing. We told him that we were leaving, and to not follow. He said if we called the cops, he'd get in touch with his people, and we would leave in caskets. We made our first train, but had to sprint to catch the next one. I had an asthma attack on the train, and joked about how it was the foretold hex that he placed on us. So strange man with the imaginary weapons, let's not meet again. I had gotten out of an 8-year abusive relationship and met someone on a popular online dating app. To be honest, I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to go watch a movie with or have a drink every now and then. I had 2 boys and was happy and living a peaceful life on my own after going through hell. So I met this guy who's just a couple of years older than me, and he has turned his life around. When he was younger, he used to be in gangs and drugs, and now he was into working out and staying fit and doing family stuff. I guess you can say I felt protected by him. He was a hard worker, self-sufficient, had a son, and he loved going to the gym daily. I myself had kind of a crazy past, but overcame it, and we seemed like a good fit. We would go to dinner, movies, normal dating stuff, but eventually wanted to spend more and more time together, and I was having trouble freeing up my time for him, and he would get angry, like really angry about this. After being with a controlling and possessive person for so long, this was obviously a red flag after 3 months, and I told him I didn't want to see him anymore. He said he needs to confess something. He admitted he was using steroids, and that was the reason for his mood swings. He cried and said he was sure that was the reason, and was willing to stop if it meant we could have another chance. And I obliged only under the condition that we remained friends. Things were okay for a while. We saw each other maybe every other week, and he started wanting to see me every week, to which I told him that I was not interested in being anything other than friends at the moment, since I was not ready for a relationship. He tried to talk me into giving him another chance, but I just didn't find myself interested in a romantic way with him, so I insisted that we just remain platonic. I had to stop talking to him because I got angry at his insistence that we still talk daily, as he said that's what friends do. He would always ask about my whereabouts, ask for pictures of who I was hanging out with, and I told him that this is not what friends do, and he just insisted he innocently wanted to know what I was up to. 6 months later, I hadn't spoken to him at all. I was happy and living my life, and on one particular night, my youngest son was at his dad's. I went out to the local bar for a drink with friends. My oldest, who was 13 at the time, was home alone, so I left a little early to make it home for 10 p.m. I lay down in bed and go to sleep. So a little info on my living situation. I had been living in my condo for almost a year now, and we lived in a great, safe community and would leave my patio sliding glass door open to let the breeze in at night. No biggie. My bedroom was close to the patio and my son would sleep in the loft that was closest to the front door. I'm dead asleep when suddenly I feel someone slowly sit on my bed. I'm laying in bed, wondering why my son would come sit on my bed so slowly. He wouldn't. I turn around and it's him, Mario, laying down in bed next to me. I sit up and ask him how he got in. He doesn't answer and just says, "I need to talk to you." I said, "Okay, when you need to talk to someone, you don't sneak into someone's room. You call them, you leave a note for them, literally anything but this." I'm thinking I'm going to kill my kid for letting him in. And he said, "I didn't have your number anymore. I need to talk to you before it's too late." I didn't even entertain the "before it's too late" bit because I was livid. But something told me to keep my cool. I sit up and say, "Look, I really want to talk to you too, but not like this. Please just leave and I promise we can talk tomorrow. Call me tomorrow." He gets up, walks over to my side of the bed and starts rubbing my shoulders and is slowly making his way to my neck. He says, "Do you really want to talk?" I look him in the eyes and say, "Yes, I've been wanting to talk to you, but not like this. Call me tomorrow." He stares at me while rubbing my neck, goes down to my shoulders and says, "Okay." He then proceeds to exit through my patio door, jumps my patio wall, which tells me this is exactly how he got in. I freak the hell out, check on my kid, who had no idea what was going on, locked all my doors, and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I message him and tell him that if I ever see him near me or on my complex, I'll call the police and to never contact me again. If you're wondering why I didn't call the cops to begin with, I knew he had a firearm, so I was scared of being retaliated against for being a snitch. And B, I figured if I called the cops, they would probably not do much, just let him out, and I was afraid of what he would do after. Either way, he left me alone, and I didn't hear from him for years. 4 years later, I'm scrolling through Facebook, and I see his face in People You May Know. I click the picture and notice that it looks like a jail picture. You know those pictures where the guy is clearly in a jail cell? I scroll down the page and his recent post is him posting his address for his family to write to, a prison address. So I Google his name, and sure enough, articles, all with the same headline, "Man arrested on suspicion of killing girlfriend." About 2 years after I had dated him, he shot and killed his girlfriend he was dating. That could have been me. And I feel like crap, thinking if there was anything I could have done to stop him. Scarier still is that he only got 12 years for his horrific crimes. I've been with my current boyfriend for 2 years, but have just started living here permanently as of October 18. I live with my boyfriend in an old, somewhat famous train station on the East Coast. It's split into two houses, basically. We live in the downstairs, the what would have been ticket station and lobby. Our bedroom is the women's waiting room. It was segregated by gender when it was functioning. There's half a staircase that leads upstairs, but we can't go up because half of it fell through the floor when it was abandoned. Ever since we started dating, I've always experienced strange things happening in our house. Around the beginning of our relationship, we were watching TV in the living room. His cat stared up at something, so I followed her gaze and witnessed a floating face staring at me out of what would have been the platform on the stairs. I've seen a woman in a red dress outside our bedroom door that leads outside. I've had the feeling of my arm being pulled and caressed while I was in bed. We've seen the glow of a phantom lantern walking down the train tracks. A white light/orb has played with me, and it would sit in a dark room, and when I would come across it, it kind of did a little dance and zipped away. I've seen an orange aura of a woman walking through our kitchen. There's also been a solid black figure moving in our kitchen, but he has left. My boyfriend lived on a different part of the property before the station was livable, and used to see a small boy running through his apartment. Typical stuff, like footsteps in the upstairs part of the house when the tenant isn't home, and things moving. When I moved in permanently, we think a lot of energy was woken up, as the place became very active. This happened in the late 80s. Hitchhiking was more common back then, but already in decline from when I was a lad. People used to do it all the time. Anyway, I was driving along the road listening to my tunes on the radio, when I see someone in the distance. It's a girl, no older than about 15, wearing what appears to be rags. Her clothes look so tattered, she surely looks homeless. I slow down my vehicle and unlock the car. I wait to see if she's going to come in, or at least say something, but she doesn't. So I lean over and roll down my window tentatively and look up at her. She's just staring at the ground. "Everything okay, miss? Do you need a ride?" She didn't say anything, so I said again, "It's quite cold out tonight. You know, I can take you to the next village if that's what you need." But again, she stood perfectly still. I was just about to pull off when I heard her move just as I was doing up my window, and she opened up the back seat and hopped in. "Where are we heading?" I asked, but she just stared down at her feet. "I'll drop you off at the next town," I said. She didn't respond. I must admit, a deep and impending sense of dread had overtaken me. There was something strange about this girl. She was just weird. There's no other way to put it. But she let off a seemingly dark aura, and it was frightening me. But as a 22-year-old guy, I was just trying to embrace bravery and be strong and not let it get to me. So I started driving. The next town over was barely a 15-minute drive, and I was heading that way, so it was in no way inconvenient for me. Just when I'm getting to Main Street do I turn around to ask if this is okay to be dropped off. She's not there. I stop the car. I look all around the back seat to see if she hasn't wedged herself behind my seat or something, but she was simply gone. I didn't know how to process this information. She was there one moment and the next she had simply vanished. So I just carried on driving and made it home in record time. Moral of the story, don't pick up hitchhikers. This story happened 4 years ago now. So my school has a sister school in Japan, and we had a foreign exchange program every year. I went last year and it was the best trip I'd ever been on. I stayed with a student and his family near Yokohama, and there was only one bad experience the whole time I was there. We were going to visit Sea Paradise, a theme park in Hakajima and going to meet up with some friends of mine and his host family. On the train, however, there was a strange man who I assumed was drunk or on some kind of substance. He kept putting his thumb up at me, which was friendly enough, so I did in return, sort of like an, "I'm okay." I expected him to leave me alone after that. However, he kept dancing around the carriage and singing quietly. He almost fell over a few times when the train stopped, which was rather amusing. After this went on about 15 minutes, a massively muscular American guy boarded the train and yelled at the man to leave me alone. He asked if I was alright and told me that there were some creepy guys hanging around that area, and it wasn't the first time he'd seen them. I think that the creepy man assumed I was alone because I was being a relatively small 13-year-old Australian kid and did not look anything like my Japanese host family on the train with me. He probably saw a chance to try and take me or something, as I looked undefended. I'm still not sure what the American man meant by what he said to me, but it sounded like this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. I hope the man doesn't return to pry on more children, but somehow I doubt that. At age 13, some random dude added me on Snapchat. I ignored it, of course, but asked my friends if they knew who he was just in case. One of my best friends told me this guy dated her older sister, and he was 19 with a 2-year-old daughter. Now I definitely knew not to add him back. 1 week later he sent me a snap, even though I didn't add him back, and said, "Morning." I ignored it. Later that night he sent me another snap, a picture of himself, and said, "Hey," and I blocked him. Granted, he didn't know I was only 13, but I didn't want to have to talk to him. The next day a new account adds me with no Bitmoji and a very slow snap score. I ignored the request, but that didn't stop the person from texting me. Guess who it was? The same dude from yesterday messaged me and asked, "Why did you block me?" I figured it was the same guy, but I wanted to make sure it was him. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "I'm..." insert username that I blocked. "Oh, I blocked you because my friend told me you dated her sister and you're 19 and I'm 13, so we probably definitely shouldn't be talking." "There's nothing wrong with being friends." "Sorry, I wouldn't be comfortable with that." "It's because I'm ugly." "No, it's because you're 19. At this point I was uncomfortable and didn't want to talk to him. He kept telling me about how girls ignore him because he's ugly, and he prefers talking to younger girls before they're nicer. Did you just hear the same thing I heard? I blocked him. 2 weeks later, a dude on Instagram requests to follow me. I checked their account out. He seemed to be about my age and had several photos of himself on the account. He looked cute and seemed legit, so I let him follow me back. It's not like I post anyway. I considered it could be the guy, but I thought that perhaps I was just being paranoid. Oh, silly me. The dude texted me, "Hey." So I responded and we start talking. I currently have internet friends and I never give away private information even if I know they're legit. This guy starts asking me questions and I'm upfront about how I won't give much away. He says he understands and we keep talking. One day he asks to FaceTime and I say yes, because I figured that since he's willing to FaceTime, he's real. No. He answers, and it was the same guy I'd already blocked twice. I hang up, and before I block him, he messages me saying he created this account so that I could see he was a nice guy. I told him to never message me again and blocked him for a third time. This happened 3 months ago. Never heard from him again, until yesterday. I babysit every once in a while and have an app that tells me when someone wants to babysit. I get a notification that someone wants me to babysit one kid for 4 hours and is offering $40. I jump at the opportunity because that's $10 per hour and very rare in the babysitting business. I get an address, tell my mum where to drop me off the next day, and she does, and I knock on the door. My mum never leaves until she knows I'm safely inside the house, and sees an adult wave. The door opens, and it's the guy from 3 months ago. He smiles and tells me to come in. I back away, tell him that he needs to leave me alone and that I'm leaving. He tells me to wait. He actually does need a babysitter for his 2-year-old kid. I tell him no way and walk off. What he yelled back was something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. But she wants you to be her new mother. That was it. I ran from the door and into the passenger seat of my mum's car. Thank goodness she was still there. I told her we needed to get the hell out of there and that I'll explain on the way. I told her the whole story, and we called the cops when we got home. They come to my house, get statements, and they say they can charge him with stalking if we wanted to. But I decide no, because I've had run-ins with the legal system before and it's a mess. I started the paperwork for a restraining order. I still have no idea how this man knew what my Instagram was, whose pictures he was using, how he knew what I looked like, and how he found me on the babysitting app. So creepy 19-year-old who stalked me and tricked me into going to his house, let's never meet again. A few years ago when I was 12, I was working this event called Thomas at our local train station. Before work on one of the days, me and 2 of my friends decided to explore and try and see if we could find weird stuff in the museum. Mainly, we liked looking for ghosts, the most famous being the woman in white. Apparently her life ended when someone pushed her on the tracks when the train was coming, and obviously you can imagine what happened to her. While me and my friend were looking, we come across one train car. We went in, and since it was very dark, I was forced to go first. I was the only boy, and we were walking in the car when I spotted something in the next one, which was a mail car. There was a woman in a large old-timey dress standing there. The unsettling thing was her neck at an unnatural angle. She was turned away from us, and as my friend Emma saw it, she lost it and screamed. As she was screaming, the lady turned, and her mouth unhinged, and we fled. We had one more friend at the lobby, and when we explained what happened, she wanted to take a look. Of course, when we returned, there was nothing. And as we were walking out, I look in the last car, and I think I saw some light. I got the hell out of there. I didn't want to risk it. This event happened a long time ago, when a pack of smokes and a gallon of gas were both less than $1, and it only cost a dime to use a payphone. It was a time when hitchhiking across town was okay, with the occasional warnings from the older folk that Ted Bundy may be our next ride. I was 17 at the time. I worked at a fast food joint in the valley along with 2 of my friends, Dottie and Jolene. We all dreamed of taking a trip together and how much fun we would have hitchhiking up the coast of California to see where we ended up. We were so naive. One day, the place we worked at got robbed, so the detective said it was most likely an inside job, and we each had to take a lie detector test. Of course we passed, but the owner fired everyone and started over. Years later we found out it was his own son. Anyway, we all got paid our 2 checks and thought we were rich. This was our opportunity. We didn't think Jolene was serious because her parents were rich and she had everything. Why would she want to leave all that while we were both staying in a French garage with nothing else to lose? But she surprised us and said she was in as well. We started out the next morning, and boy were we excited. We didn't know what we were doing or how we were getting anywhere. Nevertheless, we were having fun. All day long we were singing songs and getting rides. Pretty much it was a dream come true. The first night, we sat in a diner until morning, and we were at it again. We would take turns standing with our thumbs out while the others napped under a tree, but we'd stay close to the towns because it felt safer. Thinking back, none of this was safe. It started to get dark, and we hadn't had a ride in a while. Jolene began to miss her mum and her clean bed, but we didn't miss anything except for an umbrella because it started to rain. We didn't count on rain. We were so tired, but we just kept walking, hoping to get a ride, but it was looking pretty bleak until we saw this guy in an old truck. I got a very bad vibe from the guy, but Jolene begged us to take this ride because her feet hurt. So we did. He was just supposed to take us to the next town over. How dangerous could it be? It was a bench seat, so we all piled in. Jolene jumped in first, then Dottie, and finally me by the door. Dottie and I were so tired, as we had done most of the standing that day, and we dozed off. We must have been out a while, because when I heard Jolene make a strange sound, I cracked open my eyes and saw no streetlights, and we were going very slowly. I nudged Dottie, and we both looked over at Jolene. She's sitting straight up and stiff with tears streaming down her face, and this guy's arm was around her, holding a sharp metallic object to her neck. He was steering with his knee, and his other hand was down her pants. Just then, Dottie yelled out, "Oh my God," and it startled the man, so he straightened his arm, pinning Dottie's throat to the seat. All while this is happening, I started feeling in my backpack for my sharp pointy object, not taking my eyes off the guy. I reached over and grabbed the stick shift, slamming it in reverse. The truck made a loud, crunching sound as we all flew into the dash, and the truck hit a guardrail, so we jumped out. The guy hit his head pretty badly, and he started yelling at us like it was our fault. I noticed he had a wedding ring on, and at that point, the girls were both screaming to go, but I just had to. I jumped into the back of his truck, took his little weapon, which I found laying on the seat, and embedded it right in the junk. Of course, he had tried to hit me twice while calling me names, but I showed him my bigger version of what he had, and said while I was crawling out back, "Explain that to your wife." He drove off, chugging and grinding down the road. We found ourselves in the middle of nowhere. We could hear the sound of his truck get quieter as it got further away, and Jolene fell to her knees and cried. We tried to comfort her, but we were all in shock. There was nothing but rolling hills and winding roads for miles, and it was still raining. The roads were only a little bit lit by the full moon, occasionally peeking through the clouds. I felt responsible for these two girls, and at that time, I felt helpless. We walked for a while, and at one point even took turns carrying Jolene. After a while, a car passed us. I was so tired I forgot to even put my thumb out, and Dottie got mad at me for letting it pass. But it stopped not too far ahead of us and sat there for a minute while we were walking. Dottie asked what I thought he was doing. I didn't have a clue, so we approached it slowly. Jolene saw it was a man and started to walk backwards, saying, "No, no, 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 no," and I didn't blame her. We were all freaked out by the last guy. He was a nicely dressed man in a Cadillac. He asked what the heck we were doing out there in the rain, so we told him what happened, and he promised that he wasn't a creep. He told us that we could all sit together in the back and that he wouldn't mind taking us to the next town to get something warm to eat. It was our only choice, so we went with him. He ended up taking us to a coffee shop, and the waitress gave us some towels to dry off with. He seemed nice enough. He said that he was a successful music artist and wrote music for big movies. He then told me some of his work, and I knew it well, seeing that my sister was a theatre art major and practically raised me watching musicals. The phone was broken, so he told us he only lived about 45 minutes away, and he would be glad to let us use his phone and crash there for the night. Then, after breakfast, he would give us a ride wherever we needed to go. Well, I was more concerned about getting Jolene somewhere she felt safe. Remember, we were only 16 and 17, in the world for the first time. We finished up our food, and got back in his car. Jolene slept on my lap as I stroked her hair, and Dottie sat wide-eyed the whole way there. We arrived at his house and were pleasantly surprised that he was telling us the truth. It was a big, beautiful 2-story mansion with a big piano and studio equipment, a film screen that played the movies he was working on, and he gave us some dry clothes of his, seeing as he was short they almost fit us. Jolene fell asleep on the couch and we spoke for a while. It was starting to get really late, so I asked him where we were going to sleep. He told me the top of the stairs on the left. He said we could leave our bags on the counter, and I was kind of reluctant but too tired to care. It was a medium-sized room with one big king-size bed that was calling our names. We shut the door and he flew up the stairs and opened it, saying, "This door must stay cracked." Weird, but whatever. Dottie got up and went to the bathroom, and when she came back she shut the door. He instantly opened the door and says, "It needs to stay cracked." He stepped away and Dottie got real close to me in bed and whispered in my ear, "He's standing in the hall." I asked her what she meant, and she said he's just standing in one spot, twirling his moustache, staring at our door. Just then, Jolene sat straight up, jumped out of bed, saying she was going to be sick, and ran out of the room to the bathroom. Then the door slammed shut, waiting for her to come back. We started to worry. I got up and went to the door, but it was locked. We banged on the door, but we didn't hear anything. We started to look around the room for something to open it, but the room was bare. We tried to listen to see if we heard our friend, but nothing. Now Dottie is starting to cry, and believe me, I wanted to cry too. An hour or so passes and we hear a car pull up. We can't see the car from that room. Just as soon as it came, it left. Then we heard him come up the stairs. He opened the door and said, "I said leave it open." We both bombarded him with questions as to where our friend was and what did he do to her. He just looked at us and laughed. He told us she called her mother and she picked her up and that she was pretty mad at us. He said it was funny, but that didn't explain why we were locked in there, but he said we were mistaken. The door was probably jammed, and just to try and get more sleep, and he left the room cracking the door. We were scared. Dottie and I just lay there waiting for morning. I told her the first thing to do is to get our bags and run, and then she agreed. But then he came in. He stood there looking at us. We didn't know what he was going to do, and my weapon was downstairs in my bag. He stood up on the bed and told us to move over so he could lay down. We both reluctantly moved. He took off his pants, leaving only his underwear on, and threw them across the room, plopping them down between us. He told us to get closer to him, and Dottie started to shake. All these things were going through my head, and how to get out of this, when it hit me. An old movie I watched with my sister, where there was a similar situation and the girl starts to laugh at this gangster who's coming at her, and starts to make fun of his size, so he stopped. He punched her, but she stopped. So that's what I did. I started to laugh and make fun of him. Dottie looked at me like I was insane, but it was seemingly working, so she joined in. He started to cry and say weird things, like he was a bad boy, and we were very scared. While his eyes were covered by his hands, I nodded to Dottie and we both jumped up and ran out. I slammed his door and we ran downstairs, grabbing our bags while running to the door, but it was also locked. So we ran to the back of his house and out the sliding door by the pool. We saw he was coming down the stairs and Dottie screamed, "Where did he go?" We both threw our bags over the back wall and jumped. We didn't know he lived on a steep hill, so we both rolled down almost to the street below us. Both of us were cut and scraped, but we made it to the payphone. Still having doubts, Jolene made it out alive. We called her mother. Thankfully, Jolene was home safe, but she never knew when she left to tell anyone we were in trouble. We called a friend and he came all the way out and picked us up. We never called the police because we figured he was a big shot. We didn't think anyone would believe us at that time. Besides, we couldn't find his house again even if you paid us. But one thing I will tell you, we never hitchhiked again. I grew up in the densest region of the biggest city in South America. It's a dangerous place to the point where I've never met a single adult person who wasn't robbed at least a few times. You know the story, in some places there are a lot of words to describe snow because of how prevalent it is? Well, in Brazil, there are many words to describe a robbery. One particular common type of robbery is called an arrastão, literally a great dragging. It's when a group of robbers target individuals in a much larger crowd. The sudden scare makes those near run away, and when people see others running scared and screaming, they also start running along, dragging the whole crowd in a single direction, hence the name. The robbers use the ensuing chase to flee before the cops are called, so it's usually a very brief event. Usually. Now, back in 2009, when I used to travel by subway and walk for about 10 minutes the rest of the way to college, I studied at night, and class finished at 11:15 p.m, by which time I would take a bus to return to the subway station, because it would be far too dangerous to walk this late at night. The day was November 10th, around 10 p.m. I was in class when I noticed all the lights in the buildings I could see through the window were turned off. Soon after, the lights in my building would go off as well. I didn't know it at the time, but what happened was a huge blackout that affected half of Brazil and the entirety of Paraguay for a while. Power would gradually return, but things would only be normal the next day, at least 8 hours later. The generator kicked in, but our teacher dismissed the class due to the blackout. As I left, I discovered near total darkness outside. Streets were mostly illuminated by the cars on the road, and I went to the crowded bus stop and waited. My bus arrived very late, but eventually I reached the subway, and this is when things start to go wrong. Because of the blackout, the subway was not operational, and there was already a large crowd waiting for it to reopen. The building itself was powered by generators, but no one was allowed past the turnstiles until things got back to normal. This was a very warm Brazilian spring night. There was no ventilation in the building, and the conglomeration caused it to feel even warmer. The result of this is that the crowd was divided in two. One group waiting inside the hot, but illuminated building, and the others waiting outside in the cool, dark night. By this point, you can probably already guess what happened. I was in the group that chose to bake instead of stand in the dark, but the larger group was outside. Suddenly, I heard a few screams, and then people started to push and squeeze in. This made the heat nearly unbearable. But soon after the commotion started, it stopped. Everything got quiet and the crowd dispersed a little, and then it happened again. A few screams, everyone starts to push everyone else. Sudden quietness, unbearable heat, and the crowd starts dispersing. This kept happening a number of times, and I was scared and confused with no idea what was going on, but I overheard people talking and put the pieces together. I was already familiar with the fact that this region had a lot of beggars by day that turned muggers at night. They usually act alone or in small groups, threatening people with shivs or small weapons, snatching phones from distracted victims and the like. During the blackout, however, they took advantage of the large crowd and practiced the aforementioned arrastão. What made this unusual is the fact the crowd would not disperse because we were waiting for the subway. No one ventured far during the blackout, and no cops would ever arrive, so it kept happening over and over. I'm not sure if they were simply snatching phones, using weapons, or both, but whatever it was, it scared those outside repeatedly. I eventually managed to call my father and asked him to drive me home. I was almost more scared when I had to walk alone the short distance to where he had parked the car than of the whole ordeal. I was lucky to have someone drive me home, because as it turns out the subway would remain closed for a few more hours. I can't imagine having to deal with that situation for long. I still remember seeing an old lady waiting alone on a secluded bus stop in near complete darkness during my drive home. She was probably even more scared than I was that night. It's hard to imagine. I also hope those opportunistic robbers got what they deserved in the end. But knowing Brazil, I highly doubt it. It's 2011. I'm newly divorced and I'm in my mid-20s and a single mother. So I decide to try out some dating sites. I start talking with this guy on one of the sites and we seem to have a lot in common. I decided to give him my phone number. He seems pretty normal and we continue chatting via text and phone calls. Well, I suggest we go get some coffee to meet up. He states he doesn't drink coffee. Okay. I suggest getting some drinks at a bar. He doesn't drink alcohol. Okay. Well, he has a great idea. Let's go for a hike. This is the first red flag, and I reluctantly agree. He wants to go to this place called Batstow in South Jersey, which is a historic village with abandoned buildings, hiking trails, and the home of the Jersey Devil. Great place for a first date. So I suggest we meet in the main parking lot, but he has a better idea. Let's meet at a train station nearby, and he'll drive us over because he knows of another entrance with better hiking trails. The next red flag. I again reluctantly agree, not wanting to be rude. So the day of the date comes, and for whatever reason, I don't tell anyone I'm doing this. I think it's because I was embarrassed and was using a dating site, and I knew somewhere in the back of my mind my friends would have talked me out of it. So I pull into the train station and he's there in a late 90s Bronco. Okay, not so bad. We can't all afford newer cars. He gets out, and he's actually the guy from the picture. So that's an internal sigh of relief. We get in the car and start to head to this secret hiking trail entrance. We have a nice conversation on the way there. All seems good. We get there, and as we are getting out the car, I go grab my phone. He says, "Oh no, just leave it here. I have mine." Red flag waving in my face. Being polite and not wanting to argue, I comply. I see the entrances, and one directs you towards the village and humanity. So naturally, I suggest that one. He says no and points to the other trail that goes who knows where. I again, being the good girl that I am, say okay. Right before we set off, a bit of rebellion sets in, and I'm like, you know what? I really should have my phone on me. He starts to argue and I'm like, no, I need it in case the babysitter calls about my son. He gives it, unlocks his car, and I grab it. We set off again on the trail. We are talking and everything seems okay. I start thinking I was just overreacting. All is good. We then get to a part of the trail where we can only go one by one. So I say, you go first, I'll follow. He insists I go first in case I trip or anything and that he can grab me. I do the nervous giggle and politely decline, saying how I'm bad at following paths. He then insists I go first in a stern voice. I, stupidly, comply. The trail is getting narrower by the second, and the woods are getting darker because of the amount of trees. We are no longer talking, and the only sounds are the crunching of our footsteps. The panic starts setting in. I look back at him, and he's got this scowl on his face and a dead look in his eyes. I try to smile at him, but nothing. So I stop and say, you know what, let's turn back. I liked it better when we could walk next to each other and talk, still being polite. He says he wants to keep going this way. So I say, no, I really want to go back the other way. So I start to do just that. As I go to walk past, he grabs my arm and blocks my path. I don't say anything and just casually grab my phone out of my pocket without a word. He lets me go, just saying, whatever. And we walk back towards the car in silence, me with my phone in my hand the whole time. I amazingly did have signal, and as we were reaching the clearing where the cars are parked, he looks at his watch and states he has to go now. He has somewhere to be. We were only on this date for less than an hour, but okay, I'm not complaining. For whatever dumb reason, I get back in his car. We drive almost in near silence the entire way back to my car, and with me in a death grip on my phone and him looking miserable. He drops me off at my car and speeds away. I never heard from him again. In my naivety, I want to believe there was no chemistry between us. But let's be honest, when I decided to forget politeness and grab my phone that day, I spoiled his dastardly plans, whatever they may be. Who knows what he really had in mind for that date? I lived in a really small southern town my entire life, until a few years ago. The biggest change from moving to a major city in the northwest was the transit. I'm used to riding in a car where I have my own privacy and such, so for so long I didn't think people would notice me on the subway. Then one day I had just got done getting dinner with a friend, and we went our separate ways. She went to her dorm right away, and I went to the closest subway station to make the commute. Once I got there, I sat down in my own seat and sat my small bag on my lap, just browsing Instagram or whatever, when I noticed a flash from in front of me. A random guy dressed in scrubs, who looks like a totally upstanding guy, was taking pictures of my cleavage, very apparently. I've never been in this situation before, so I just ignore him. I was more afraid of his reaction if he knew I'd noticed. I'd tried using my hair to cover my exposed skin. Well, I made it to my stop, and this person gets off at the same stop. It could have been coincidence, but he followed me all the way out to the restrooms in a corner and decided to wait out there until I came out. I don't know why, but by the time I took, thankfully he was gone. If not, I definitely would have told a worker, but I don't think pictures are a crime, so creepy perverse dude, let's not meet again. My friends and I, 3 teenage girls, decided to hitchhike into the large city we live near to attend a party. The first people who picked us up were pretty cool, listened to music, smoked some pot, and dropped us off on the highway to make the last leg of our journey. I got to sit up front. This creepy middle-aged man who picked us up asked if we would like to go party with him at the casino in the city. He had a room for the night and was willing to pay us $1,000 each. Immediately alarmed, we told him our friends were expecting us and that we were only 16 and not interested. He then suggested one of us could join him for a few hours and he would then drop them off for the rest of the night. No thanks, bud. Not interested. He then decides he's going to drop us off at a local coffee shop, go home, switch vehicles, pick us up, and take us to our destination. We were thinking that sounds lovely. So he did. We waited for him to pull away and caught a bus to the party. So creepy asked John, who knew we were underage, please let's never meet again, and I'm never gonna hitchhike.